Wilderness areas are vast expanses of land whose beauty attracts millions of people from all over the world every year. For some, this is a place of tranquility and peace. For a select few though, these forests present them with an experience that not only baffles them, but investigators too. In the cases we're about to discuss, one unsettling thread ties them together: the idea that the people missing never believed that they were truly alone. Let's begin by going back to the 22nd of September 2012. 53-year-old Linda Ortega went on a hiking and camping trip with their 56-year-old brother Eddie Huff in the forests of the Arkansas Ozarks, which is located near the town of St. Joe. This was a very out-of-the-way rural area with densely packed woods that they'd chosen. Linda had expressed an interest to Eddie in wanting to learn some survival skills, and it seems that the pair just wanted to go out and meet up again anyway. So they planned this trip together where he would teach her some things. Unfortunately though, it didn't take long for things to go awry and the two siblings to become separated. Though as we'll come to see later, they each had confused accounts in regards to how they became separated in the first place. Linda Ortega says she and her brother Eddie went for a walk Saturday looking for a fishing hole he'd heard about, but before long they were lost and a peaceful walk turned into 5 terrifying days. This is going to become a bit of a roller coaster as we go on. So at some point during this search for the fishing spot, Eddie came to the realization that not only couldn't he find it, he also realised that they were now completely and hopelessly lost. For 3 days, they hiked and camped trying to retrace their steps and find a way out. On the 4th day though, something happened that isn't all clear that caused them to become separated. As you might imagine, this caused a massive problem because now not only were they both lost separately, but Eddie was in a panic trying to find Linda, but his shouts and calls for her went completely unanswered. Finally, it seems that at some point he realised that the only hope now was to try to get out of the woods and get help, but things only get weird from here. Thankfully, Eddie did actually make it out of the forest and managed to get home successfully and safely, outside of some scratches from wading through the forest. In any case, as he got home, he thought that Linda also made it out okay because he believed that he'd just seen her sitting on their relative's porch who lived nearby him. Tired, Eddie went to rest inside his house, not understanding that whoever he'd just seen was not Linda. Linda, on the other hand, had vanished and was still desperately lost in the Arkansas Ozarks. Shelley Friend was Linda's niece, who asked Eddie where Linda was, and he told her that he'd seen her on the porch of the relative's house. Shelley knew immediately that this wasn't the case, and the two quickly stormed over to the house where it became known that Linda was missing. Eddie was straight on the phone to local law enforcement, who organised a major search effort to find her. It's important to note that Linda had been all alone for 2 or 3 days now, and the pair had been lost for a time before that. The county sheriff, Kenny Cassell, scrambled and managed to get 75 people in the woods that following morning. They had people on horseback and all-terrain vehicles scouring the forest for any sign of her. A further 5 days went on during this search, which convinced the sheriff's department that all hope had been lost and that they were now looking for a body. As luck would have it, it seems that some of those survival tips from Eddie had actually paid off because on the 5th day of the search, some of the rescuers came across a very confused and disoriented Linda. When they found her, she'd lost her shoes and she was wandering alone inside the woods. According to the Daily Mail, the Chief Deputy, Dwayne Pierce, had said that upon her discovery, as she came out the woods, understandably, she wasn't quite about her head. He also noted, aside from that she hadn't sustained any injuries outside of some scratches and bruising. Linda told authorities that she'd put the survival skills that she was taught to good use, and managed to sustain herself on berries and other such things, watercress and hazelnuts. I can't imagine that she was expecting to have to use these skills so soon after learning them. She also came across a creek in the forest that she'd been drinking water from. Deputy Chief Pierce then confirmed that no foul play was suspected, And I can see why he led with that, because things are about to get weird, so as we so often do, let's get bizarre. As I'm sure you can imagine, people had a million questions for Linda about what was going on and how she spent her time missing. The nights, apparently, were very cold and she wasn't able to find anything in the way of shelter, so she would get as small as she could and huddle up into a ball to try and stay warm overnight. She also said something particularly unusual. Linda claims that she wasn't the only one out there. I would see people. I'd ask for help and they'd act like they didn't even hear me, says Ortega. She says she remembers them looking right at her and not saying a thing. This didn't just happen once either. She said that there were numerous occasions that she had seen what she thought were other hikers in this area and had called to them for help, but each time she saw them, she got no response. Aside from looking at her, they didn't acknowledge her presence outside of that and just continued on their way. She said that it was like they were just looking right through her and couldn't see or hear her. Somehow, what she had to say gets even weirder. During the darkness of the night, she stated that she believed that people were hiding in the bushes, just watching her as she huddled up on the forest floor. She stated that she couldn't really make out any details because it was so dark. She described them as being very weird, which again, somehow sounds like an understatement. These people were hiding in the bushes. They were weird people, very weird, Ortega says. She also didn't know just how long she'd been missing and said that the time she spent in the woods were also somewhat blurry too. Just that one moment she was lost and the next thing she knew she'd been discovered by search and rescue. Now, as alluded to at the start, let's revisit their moment of separation because there's even weirdness in that too. Eddie was confused in the first place and didn't really know how the pair got separated. Linda was just as confused as him, stating that she believed that Eddie had been injured somehow and she left him to try to get help. So weirdly, in essence, it seems that she believed that Eddie was the one in danger. Based on all the sources I've read through, I didn't come across any mention of Eddie's supposed injury, so who even knows what was happening there? It sounds like a sudden bout of confusion, which is very unusual because it seemed to happen to two people at the exact same time. The authorities, reasonably, put the descriptions of the hikers and dark figures hiding in the bushes at night down as hallucinations. You can obviously see why they might have concluded that. I supposed she could have had some toxic ingestion that may have caused hallucinations. But you know, she's been very consistent with that story, and today in her mental examinations, she seems very oriented and appropriate in conversation, says Dr. John Sorg of North Arkansas Medical Center. Linda herself did state that she'd been eating berries, so could that have caused this if she'd eaten the wrong types? Dr. Sorg seemed to suggest that that could have been the case, but these kind of toxic berries are also usually quite harmful for a person's physiological health too, but she wasn't presenting with any of those symptoms. Linda's medical examinations didn't pick up any problems with her and found that she was overall in good health. This apparently surprised the medical staff given that she'd been missing in such a rugged and harsh place for an extended period of time. You'd think that the doctors might have been able to say definitively one way or another if she had or hadn't eaten something toxic. I don't believe that Linda had any complaints of stomach problems or anything to that effect, at least nothing that I came across. I can see why the idea of these people not being hallucinations wasn't entertained in any serious manner, because if you were to entertain that idea, then things just become weird almost immediately. What was she experiencing and seeing in those moments? Who was staring right at her and ignoring her, basically looking right through her while she asked for help? That would open up a can of worms that there aren't any particularly good answers to. I say that because she wasn't harmed in any way. She hadn't sustained any injuries, and she didn't have any valuables on her as far as I'm aware. So for what reason would people have had for hiding in the bushes and doing nothing but watching her? It doesn't make sense. All I know is if I ever saw something like that, there'd be a me-shaped hole in the nearest door I could find. I believe that in the end, Linda did try to turn the ordeal into something positive and perhaps less creepy and disturbing to think about. She told the sheriff that she felt that she had a good presence around her that helped her get out of the woods. In any case, what are your thoughts here? Do Do you think that Linda was hallucinating? Or was she experiencing something else, perhaps somewhat more abnormal? Casey Hathaway was 3 years old when he vanished from the Ernle area of Craven County. The county sheriff, Chip Hughes, said that Casey disappeared at 1:45 PM on the 22nd of January 2019. He said that Casey was last seen playing with 2 of the children in his grandmother's backyard, but a problem was noticed shortly thereafter when the other kids came back inside without Casey. Casey's grandmother, among other adults that were present inside the home, conducted a preliminary search around the area that went on for 45 minutes, but there was no sign of him anywhere. Those searching were said to have been astounded because they didn't understand how he could have gotten far away enough as to remain undiscovered in the time that he was outside. Whatever it was that happened here to Casey, it went down quickly, and after the search failed, the call to authorities was made. Let's have a listen.
Okay, and what's going on there?
We lost my 2-year-old grandson that's walked in the woods back there and we can't find him. 3-year-old grandson.
Okay, so who's there with them?
His little sister.
You said he's 3-year-old?
Yeah, he's 3.
Okay.
The girls come to the house and left him there and he's walked off somewhere and we can't find him.
Okay, but you're not there at the house now?
I'm at the house, yeah.
The authorities took the situation seriously and almost immediately had boots on the ground looking for Casey. By nightfall, there were over 100 searchers in the vicinity of the home. This was a rapid response by anyone's estimation. Chip went on to say that there were so many people flocking to the scene that it was becoming difficult to organise them effectively, and they had to turn some of them away to avoid a messy search. We know that for some reason, the FBI took an interest in Casey's disappearance because Chip stated that they wanted to be involved and sent people down to assist. You have to assume that they, along with everyone else, must have thought that Casey had been taken as opposed to just wandering off into the woods. WITN News reported the boy apparently went back into thick woods behind the home. They didn't expand upon that though, but it was later made clear that this was just an assumption rather than a visual sighting. So no one had actually seen Casey leave, which is important. Despite the search starting so soon, Casey wasn't found on the day he went missing. What was particularly troubling was that on the following day, the 23rd, a discussion took place among searchers that painted a bleak picture. Overnight, temperatures were found to have been below freezing for 11 hours before hovering in the mid to low 30s Fahrenheit, which is around 0 to 2 degrees Celsius. Casey was not dressed for those conditions, and now the odds of finding him safe and sound had plummeted. That was the assessment of the professional search and rescue teams. Not long after that conversation took place that morning, the FBI arrived, but they didn't come alone. With them came a dispatchment of US Marine Corps who entered the woods alongside those already present. This search, with a mounting level of presence and escalation, went on until 9:30 PM before it got so dark that searchers could no longer see anything. But they still hadn't found Casey. I do believe there was a smaller presence stationed in the woods looking for him overnight, but I don't believe they were moving around too much. The obvious problem now is that it would become very easy to get turned around and become lost themselves. Chip indicated that they weren't ruling out any possibilities, including the idea that a third party might have been involved in taking Casey. The FBI spokeswoman on scene, Shelley Lynch, seemed to rein him in a bit though, and said that there was no reason to believe that he hadn't just walked away and become lost. This is interesting in and of itself because the FBI, generally speaking, will only get involved in a missing persons case if they believe that a crime has been committed. So if they didn't believe that happened, then why were they even there? I'm speculating here, but I'm going to assume that they did think he'd been taken, but didn't want to put the community into a panic. That surely must have been the case, or they wouldn't have been there in the first place. Jerry Williams was not related to this case in any way, but she was an FBI agent for 26 years. When asked, what does it take for the FBI to investigate missing persons, here's what she had to say. The FBI will officially open and lead a missing persons investigation when foul play is suspected. We could stop right there, but she goes on to say, and if the last known location was on federal property, or if the missing person is an official of the country. So in essence, despite what spokeswoman Shelley was saying publicly, they must have suspected foul play, or they were interested for another reason that was simply never made clear. It's obvious as to why foul play might have been suspected though. Casey got away fast, and he got away far enough as to be undiscoverable by the 600 people that were in the woods on the 23rd. On the 24th, temperatures were now just hovering around freezing the entire time, but the weather also worsened and it began pouring down with rain, which was about the worst possible combination you could have hoped for. If Casey had just wandered into the forest, hypothermia would likely have already taken place overnight. And if somehow it hadn't, now it seemed all but inevitable that this would happen. Because of the conditions, Chip said that they'd shifted their efforts and were only allowing professional searchers into the woods because it becomes so dangerous. In such a short time, the search had covered up to 1,000 acres of this heavily wooded area, but there were no signs of Casey anywhere. At least, that would remain true up until 10:34 PM that night. Authorities in Ernle, North Carolina, said they have located a boy in good health who was reported missing since Tuesday. Professional search and rescue crews found Casey, FBI spokeswoman Shelley Lynch said. Chip said, "It's a stressful time for the family and everybody involved, but I can tell you we are certainly doing our due diligence, spending a lot of time with them and just sorting through all of the difficult stories." I can't speak on behalf of Chip, but when going through the press reports, it certainly seems to me that he thought that something wasn't right here. You can see why too. Casey was found in good condition and hadn't suffered from hypothermia despite being small, thin, dressed in light clothing, and being out for 2 nights in temperatures that dropped below -4 degrees Celsius, which is under 25 degrees Fahrenheit. Casey was found in the woods 40 yards or so off Tola and Aurora roads. This is around a quarter of a mile away from the point at which he vanished. Chip went on to say that there were no signs that someone had taken Casey. This was because, obviously, he'd been found safe, but also because he hadn't sustained any injuries aside from the cuts that were consistent with being in the woods the whole time. The only sign that something was amiss was the fact that somehow this young boy had not suffered from hypothermia despite the temperatures and rain. Shane Greer was the person who found Casey, I believe, and he said that Casey was stuck in some briars that he had to untangle him from. During a press conference, one of the reporters asked an important question. Did Casey indicate how he got in there by himself? To which Chip replied, no, he hasn't said a whole lot. The area Casey was found was described as treacherous, and Chip had to wade through fairly deep water before even being able to reach Casey's location. I thought this was interesting too. ABC 13 News stated that the tip that led to Casey's discovery was because someone thought they'd heard a child crying in the woods. Chip revealed that had happened many times in different locations, but they never led to Casey up until now. Were these misidentifications then? Or do we entertain the idea that Casey might have been moving around, fairly quickly at that, insinuating that he wasn't alone? Let's be honest too, he was being kept warm somehow. Right, if we weren't already there, let's get bizarre again. Chip was asked by a reporter, how did Casey survive and stay safe out there? Chip responded by saying he didn't really get into how he was able to survive. He did say that he had a friend in the woods that was a bear that was with him for 2 days. Chip then moved on from that line of thought and no follow-up questions were asked about that. It might have been interesting to know how many bears are out at this time. Aren't they expected to be hibernating? Do bears often behave this way? The conversation went on and Chip stated that Casey still had all of his clothes on, but obviously was soaked. He said to get to him, our rescuers had to wade through waist-high water and then acknowledged that Casey himself wasn't quite at waist height. I think this might have been a subtle indication that Chip himself didn't believe that Casey was alone. But again, I'm not sure and I can't put words in his mouth. 6ABC News was the first outlet I came across that pointed out a degree of skepticism. They stated Many questions remain unanswered, and Sheriff Hughes said he doesn't believe Casey was in the area the whole time. Chip said, "I think he moved around." I think he moved around too, but I don't believe that he was alone. Shane Greer went on to say that somebody looked after him, that was God at work. Casey's family also put out some similar statements. Casey's aunt, Brianna Hathaway, in a Facebook post said her nephew was healthy, smiling and talking. He said he hung out with a bear for 2 days. God sent him a friend to keep him safe. God is a good God, miracles do happen. Here's another by the family. This little one was lost in the woods for days in the freezing temperatures, rain, dark nights and wind. He told us that his best friend, the bear, was with him to keep him safe. Thanks to God's mercy, he came home to us alive and well. Chip reiterated by saying that Casey didn't say how he was able to survive, and then the article ends by stating that the authorities are still working to determine exactly what happened, but suspect that Casey was moving around in the woods while they searched. I disagree with Chip to an extent, because I think Casey was telling them exactly how he survived, kind of anyway. He was, in essence, telling everyone that he wasn't alone. I have no idea what that might have looked like, but someone or something does perhaps appear to have been caring for him, or at least was with him, because he was kept warm somehow and didn't suffer from hypothermia despite all odds. Under these conditions and in these circumstances, that is not normal. People were happy that Casey was safe, and it seems that everyone just wanted to move on. But there was a healthy skepticism that remained among some press outlets. On the 27th of June that year, the Boston Herald basically just stated that law enforcement are still unsure as to how Casey remained healthy in the woods for 2 days without food or water. The Guardian, on the other hand, contacted a bear behavioural expert by the name of Chris Servheen from the University of Montana. In relation to Casey being looked after by a bear, he stated this: "I've never known such a thing to happen. Bears don't do that. Wild bears aren't friendly with people. I don't want to say he's not telling the truth. He obviously thinks he's seen things and maybe he's got a teddy bear at home. But I've seen no evidence anything like that has ever happened." So, if it wasn't a bear that kept him warm, what are the alternatives? I don't know, but I'm glad that I'm not alone in this line of thought. Some people want to know how a child could survive those frigid temperatures for 3 days, and some believe Casey wasn't lost, but instead taken and later placed in the woods. Sheriff Hughes said everybody's got a theory about what took place and how there is no way he could have survived. It was by the grace of God that Casey survived. The notion that he was sitting in a house or a vehicle for 2 days and put out there just a couple of hours before we found him is absolutely not true. His core temperature was very low, his fingers all had a bit of frostbite. A lot of what the medical experts were telling us was conducive to him being out in the elements for an extended period of time. The coldness, the wet, and just the terrain we were dealing with, this kid was looked after, make no mistake about it. The FBI presence becomes an interesting point also. I thought from the get-go that Chip thought that this was weird. Did the FBI early on also realise that this was out of the ordinary? That's a question I can't really answer, but Casey believes that he was with a bear. So, was it literally a bear? Was it someone dressed in an animal costume? Was it a massive dog? Was it something else entirely? What do you think happened here? Now, let's revisit a disappearance I covered some time ago. The first I heard of Eloise Lindsay was from the Aiken Standard, who wrote an article about her on the 14th of November 1989. Eloise had planned a trip to Table Rock State Park, which of course is around 50 miles away from the Great Smoky Mountains. I'll let the article explain. Authorities have searched beyond the trail marker that a missing 22-year-old Atlanta woman is thought to have gone, but still have not found the hiker who failed to return from a week-long trip. Eloise Lindsay began her hike at Table Rock State Park in Pickens County on the 4th of November and planned to end up Saturday at Whitewater Falls in Oconee County, a distance of 43.3 miles, officials said. Eloise would be reported missing by a friend who was supposed to be picking her up, but of course when she didn't arrive at the agreed time, this set alarm bells off for the friend. The Emergency Preparedness Agency director said that he had absolutely no idea what could have happened to her, and that his searchers had scoured on and off the trail that she was said to be on, but they found no trace of her at all. The authorities spoke to many of the hikers in the area, but none of them had seen her at any time. Unfortunately, there weren't any reports that I could find that talked about this incident in any kind of depth. At least, that is, until she was found, and this is where things get weird. This was reported on the 21st of November 1989 by the Kannapolis Daily Independent. A 22-year-old woman who spent 16 days in the woods before being found by a hunter says most of the time that she was running, thinking men were chasing her. I don't have any evidence, I just know I was terrorized for 2 weeks. This hike of hers was supposed to take 7 days, and she came prepared for that, bringing 7 days worth of supplies. And it was of course after she'd been missing for that week that she was reported as such. Authorities in Oconee and Pickens counties and neighbouring North Carolina counties searched the area by foot, air and horseback with tracking dogs, ending the search Saturday when no clues to her whereabouts were found. Or in other words, at no point did the dogs find her scent, and 0 clues were found for the duration of her time spent missing. It wasn't as a result of the search effort that she was found. She was actually found by a hunter around 5 miles off the trail and in the vicinity of the end of her planned hike, so she did end up quite close to her destination. On the 7th of November, 3 days into the hike, I felt like I was being chased through the woods by a group of men. Up until this morning, I felt like I was being chased. I never saw them. I never wanted to see them. I heard them talk about me, though. It might be called paranoia, but I don't think it was. The way they kept on my trail for the whole time, I just know that I was terrified for the whole 2 weeks. She said that she ditched her backpack with the week's worth of supplies early in an attempt to speed up so she could lose them. So you know she must have been completely terrified here because she'd effectively given up the supplies that would be keeping her alive. Let's hear more of what she had to say. Speaking of the supposed men, she said, "I could tell there was no good intent involved, but there was no clear indication that they meant to harm me. I used instinct like a deer. I could hear them using walkie-talkies and they were talking about me." When asked how she survived, she said that she would drink from streams and kept some dried apples from a pack. She also stated that she found some stale donuts hidden inside a tree. It was never explained how she found those. She said that she also heard helicopters and did understand that they were probably looking for her, but she also said that she was too scared to try and get their attention because it might have given her position away to the men who she believed were following her. She also said that when she finally met with the hunter, she was delirious and told the man that she didn't know if she could trust him. Thankfully, he was able to reassure her, and he took her to his truck and got help. The authorities did make some comments on her experience. From the very beginning, before the search was initiated, she became frightened or paranoid that somebody was trying to run her down. However, we don't believe anybody was chasing her. Although the hiker insisted that men had chased her along the trail, authorities said they have no such evidence and have no plans to investigate further. Officials who interviewed the backpacker said the most likely scenario is that she became frightened and panicked when she saw hunters, and later thought her rescuers were the same men chasing her. The sheriff added, "We don't believe anybody was chasing her." I can only imagine Eloise must have felt pretty dismissed by this because she remained steadfast in her position that there was someone in the woods with her, a group of them. During the search, there were never any findings that other people were there with her off the trail. There weren't any footprints that were ever found, hers included, and nothing to indicate that there was a group of individuals near her. I think that the authorities' hypothesis is actually quite reasonable, but I get the sense that she was feeling somewhat gaslighted, because she was absolutely adamant that she was not alone. The authorities suggesting that perhaps at some stage she may have been hiding from the searchers themselves. In the end, it's not really clear at all what happened. And I would point out too that problems began for her on the 7th of November. She, of course, wasn't reported missing until the 11th, meaning that much of the time that she was having these experiences of being followed and harassed, there wasn't actually anybody even looking for her. So while it may be true that she had mistaken and hid from the searchers at some point, that can't have been the case for the entire duration. There was no mention of her suffering from any kind of condition, and as far as I can tell, she hadn't hallucinated or had delusions before. These kind of health conditions or substance abuse activities are normally reported on. So something startled Eloise initially. What was it? Was she not alone? She said that she never actually saw them, but she could hear them, and it sounded like they were using walkie-talkies. That's about all of the information I could find on Eloise, so please do share your thoughts with me. What happened here? Now, let's move on to the next disappearance. In early June of 1951, an interesting incident was unfolding in the rugged Sangre de Cristo Mountains, roughly 6 miles away from the very location Nell disappeared from. This disappearance involved 3 youngsters who all went missing together. The McGee and Cross families were lifelong friends who spent a lot of time in each other's presence, travelling, hiking, inviting one another into their homes, etc. They had decided to travel this mountain together along with their children to holiday with one another, but something would go awry very soon into the trip. Around lunchtime on the 7th of June 1951, the mothers took the kids for what they thought would be a pleasant picnic. However, more than 200 men searched the mountains today for 3 small children who wandered away from a family picnic. Weary after fanning through the tortuous area with flashlights and lanterns all night, the group was joined this morning by low-flying planes and men on horses. Missing in the nearly 2-mile-high Santa Fe ski basin area are Larry McGee, 7, his sister Jeanette, 5, along with Stephen Cross, 3. The mothers spent about 3 hours frantically searching for them before telephoning to Santa Fe for help. Mobile searchlight trucks played beams on low-hanging clouds throughout the night, hoping to attract them. So specifically, what appears to have happened here is that the 3 went off a short distance to play together. Clearly, had gotten out of sight of the mothers, who can't have thought much of it at first. A few minutes later, after realising they can't see or hear them anymore, the mothers go to check on them, but there was no trace of them anywhere. Now, thankfully, the 3 were found after 28 hours of searching, but not without some surprises. 3 small children were found tired, hungry and thirsty, but otherwise unharmed tonight after 28 lonely hours in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. On hearing the news, their parents burst into tears. While hundreds of searchers trudged the jagged, steep mountains with lanterns and flashlights last night, the 3 slept in a hollow log. "I took good care of them," 7-year-old Larry boasted. "Once, I heard someone yelling, but I didn't answer because I thought they were big gorillas." Larry effectively made the point that when they wandered away, they were non-physically pushed in one direction because they heard, or thought that they were hearing, and I quote, "big gorillas around them." State Police Chief Joe Roach radioed that none of the 3 suffered any ill effects from the 45-degree or 7 degrees Celsius night temperature. They were only clad in t-shirts and blue jeans when they wandered away. The youngsters were first sighted in Box Canyon, about 3.5 miles from the spot where they disappeared. They were spotted by 3 airmen, and I believe this was actually from the air too, rather than on the ground, and they then relayed their whereabouts. Though I'm not certain on that because the articles are a little vague here. In any case, they were found over 3.5 air miles away, though they had probably travelled more like 5 or 6 miles because you can't walk these areas in a straight line. The distance they travelled surprised some of the searchers, who also made the point that to reach that spot, they had forded a dangerous stream that they were lucky not to have been swept away by. Now, another bit of oddness is that it seems that the three also couldn't decide on whether they were being followed or chased by gorillas or a bear. Larry had said that they kept seeing a bear trailing them up the slopes and that it was tiring to go up. News outlets chalk this up to an overactive imagination, and while that certainly may be true, it's odd because these kids were scared of something, because whatever it was, or whatever they thought it was anyway, it had frightened them enough to not reply to what may have been actual calls from the searchers at some point. Larry was adamant about this too, the idea that they'd been chased by a bear. As weird as that sounds, by the way, it's not unheard of. I have a video dedicated to unusual disappearances in which children would later relate that a bear was involved somehow, either stating that the bear was looking after them or taking them to the place that they would later be found, etc. I'll link it in the description and in the top right now if you want to open a new tab. Anyway, that's basically the end of the paper trail, and there was no further mention of this disappearance that I could find. But to sum it up, the distance they travelled and this so-called dangerous stream that they'd forded surprised the searchers. Alongside their tales of big gorillas or bears following them, I'm sure that creeps out some of the people looking for them. Whatever the case may be though, at least they were found and in good health. Now, let's explore the final disappearance. Donald Duggar was 43 years old when he went missing on the 11th of August 2012. Donald was a truck driver for a company based in Minnesota. On this day, he had successfully completed the journey in his truck, but disappeared after entering his own car. The first we hear of Donald is around 10 days after he disappeared on the 21st. Late Tuesday night, the Roseau County Sheriff's Office was still searching for a missing Detroit Lakes man. A vehicle belonging to Donald Duggar was found Saturday, stuck and abandoned 1 mile north and east of the Winner Silo in Beltrami State Forest. Right off the bat, it's not at all clear what happened to Donald. He seemed to have successfully finished his workday, got into his own vehicle, but then something must have gone awry after getting it stuck. It's not entirely clear right away why the authorities thought this, but they believe that after getting stuck, he'd exited the vehicle and proceeded to walk south to the Winner Forest Road near Elkwood Cemetery. And the way they stated it so confidently, to me, must mean that they had some indication that that's what happened, whether they found footprints or whether there was a scent or something like that wasn't specified though. We do know as a matter of fact though, that he never made it home that night. Becker County Sheriff's Captain Kelly Shannon said local officials checked Donald's home in Holmesville Township. There was no evidence that he'd been there at all, nothing. We also get some interesting information in regards to the search. Family members are asking volunteers to hold off for a while on a search party being organised by a friend of a missing Detroit Lakes man. The Roseau County Sheriff's Office is not yet ready to ask volunteers in the search for Donald, according to his sister Deanna Duggar. At first glance, I was a bit surprised by that, but I suppose it does make some sense that if there was any evidence of something untowards, or just in general, they perhaps didn't want it to be trampled over by volunteers who perhaps weren't geared towards this kind of area. The thick terrain is not suitable for a walkthrough type search. There is no cell phone coverage at all in the area, and the Sheriff's Department is concerned that volunteers will get lost or make it more difficult for tracking dogs to do their work, she said. We are talking about an 80 mile by 60 mile area that he may or may not be in. He may have been picked up by somebody. She said the search was organised by Donald's friend Jeffrey Olds, who is not on the scene and is acting out of emotion. I mean, you can certainly understand people acting out of emotion in this situation. Everyone will have just wanted him to be found as quickly as possible. At this point, the authorities said that ground, air and dog searchers have all failed to locate any sign or indication of Donald. As mentioned, they must have had some initial reason to believe that Donald had headed south from the car. Again, it's not clear yet whether that was based on discovered footprints or the dogs finding a scent or something else. Because this disappearance was proving very difficult to solve, the authorities then appealed to hunters in the area to look for unusual things that were out of place. Things like clothing or perhaps an item that just doesn't belong. A According to the sheriff's office, after Donald had completed his trip in the truck, he was last seen at about 6:30 am on the 11th of August while removing personal items from the truck into his personal vehicle. His vehicle, a Hyundai Elantra, was located on the 18th of August northeast of Winner Silo in Beltrami Island State Wildlife Area. That is believed to be the first time that anyone was aware that he had been missing. That's both interesting and highly unfortunate because this means that the search was already a week behind, given that's how long it took after disappearing to be noticed as missing. It's unfortunate that family and friends didn't notice sooner, but according to the article, that just unfortunately wasn't the case here. Right, now at this point we begin to get some very specific information from the family. Some of this information comes from the Vanished podcast and Donald's family themselves. I would most certainly recommend that you have a look at their episode on Donald, which you can find linked in the description below. Firstly, and interestingly, the articles referenced so far never mention this fact, and we're going to have to get bizarre. While Donald was inside his company's truck, he called his sister and informed her that there were people outside the truck. During his conversation with his sister, she heard Donald say, "Who's out there? What's going on? I'm trying to cooperate." And at that point, he told her that he was going to call 911. He is part of that phone call.
Tozo County 911.
Yeah, there's supposedly someone outside here, and I keep asking who it is and nobody's saying anything.
And what kind of activity or noises do you hear? Do you hear people? Do you see anyone?
Oh, there's movement out there, and with my camera, I'm negative. I can see stuff, but I don't know what they are for sure, I guess. And I keep asking for an answer, don't get one, so
Okay.
I'm not 100%.
When the officer arrived at Donald's truck, he told him that he'd seen around 10 people outside his truck dressed in camouflage. The officer had a look around the vehicle, but the men that had been referenced were nowhere to be seen. Donald told him that the 10 figures had ran away to the west. Again, the officer checked out the area, but there was no indication that anyone else was there. This officer then had a conversation on the phone with officers back at the department, and because nothing had happened, he went on his way to pick up another officer whose shift was about to start. The pair got in contact with the department again and went to see Donald for the second time, just in case there was some kind of medical condition or something like that happening to him. They met with him as he was shifting his personal belongings from the truck to his car. At this point, he told them that he'd seen the 10 figures in camouflage again. The two officers then went and checked the area, but again, there was no sign of anyone else's presence in the area. Suspecting some kind of medical problem, they asked to check Donald's truck and he allowed them to. The officers said that there was no medication or substances on Donald's person or in the truck. They asked him if he'd like a trip to the hospital, but he refused, stating that there was nothing wrong with him. He seemed to believe that these 10 individuals were messing with him, or something to that effect. It's not clear. These officers then received a call detailing that a car in the area had rolled over and they were instructed to head over there. This was the very last time Donald was ever seen. Now, I'd earlier suspected this, but when the car was found, footprints leading away to the south were also discovered. The authorities noted that they weren't sure to whom they belonged, but it seems as though they were suspected as belonging to Donald, because they were around the same size as you'd expect from him. Shortly after Donald had gone missing, there was some bad rains in the area, so the tracks weren't completely clear. And obviously, at some point, they must have petered off into nothing because they didn't lead to him. During the search, they located one of his gloves, which was said to have been recovered from the road, and I believe was found around half a mile away. Inside Donald's car was his sidearm. Now, what's interesting about this is that according to his family, he would never have left that behind, and he always had it on his person at all times. It's not clear what this finding indicates. After his car had gotten stuck on the stump and he got out, does it indicate that he wasn't afraid in that moment? It seems to me that if you were afraid or suspicious, you wouldn't leave that inside the car. Also of note was that his phone was missing from the car, which I would reason that it was likely on his person. They tried pinging the phone but had no luck due to a lack of coverage in the area, and also probably because at this point it ran out of battery. At 3 AM, his friend Wade received an odd text message from Donald. From what I can gather, it simply read, "That's BS." It's not clear what Donald was referring to. This is pretty much all of the information we have in regards to Donald, other than clarifying that Donald has never been found. So now I suppose the question becomes, what are the possibilities here?
In relation to that question, the next question has to be in regards to the 10 camouflage figures Donald describes seeing around his truck, messing with him and running off. Were these individuals actually there, or was Donald hallucinating these events? There was no sign or indication of any struggle. Again, Donald left his sidearm in his car, which could indicate that he wasn't fearful of what was outside the car when it got stuck. Which leads us on to the next point. If Donald was hallucinating those events, coupled with the fact that he'd had a little accident which got the car stuck, that could indicate that he may have been very tired at the time. If no substances were found and there wasn't some kind of medical event happening, it could leave room for something like that being the case. In that he hallucinated these camouflage people, then while driving had either fallen asleep or wasn't able to give his full attention to the road, which led to getting his car stuck on the stump. I will note that hallucinations are a common symptom of sleep deprivation. I'd also like to say that I'm not arguing in favour of that hypothesis, but it could be one that makes some sense. Or of course, I could be completely wrong about all of that and he was in fact being bothered by a group of individuals, at which point things become increasingly more difficult to explain. None of his personal belongings had been taken, aside from the phone, which was probably on his person at the time, I would assume. I know that a lot of people are interested in this point, so it's also worth highlighting the fact that cadaver dogs were used in the attempts to find Donald, and as far as I can tell, based on all of the information we have present, they were never able to find a scent. Could this mean that he just wasn't in the area anymore, or perhaps was much deeper in the forest? It was said that there was some bad rains in the area shortly after the disappearance, so that may account for the lack of a scent. Though from my understanding, while it doesn't help the situation, it doesn't eliminate the scent completely. Though again, that might be accounted for when you consider the time that lapsed between going missing and the searching.
Ultimately though, Donald has never been found. What do you make of this? I'd just like to take the time to thank you for watching, and a big thank you to the patrons who've been running around on the screen. If you'd like to become a patron and support the channel, then please do visit the link in the description below. If you found the video interesting, then please do leave a like, hit the bell and subscribe if you haven't already. If not, then feel free to leave a dislike. I'm just looking for your honest opinion either way. I hope that you've had a great day or evening, depending on where you are, and I'll see you in the next one. Be safe guys, peace.